So wandering into the town of Nain, Jesus meets a woman who is at a dead end, a trauma that makes her as good as dead. Well, she might as well have been dead. She's a widow, a woman alone, vulnerable. And in the Bible, widow is code for a person on the bottom, a person who cannot make it alone. She had a son. He undoubtedly supported her, protected her. But see them bringing the body of her son out of town for burial? The mourners weep, and surely they are weeping not only for the dead man, but also for the widow. The next funeral in town, well, it could be for her. Despite all the uproar of the resurrection that Easter, down deep we may have suspected that nothing about our time had fundamentally changed. Caesar's minions who arrested Jesus and then tortured him to death, they still seem to be securely in charge. We're still having funerals even after Easter. All those old distinctions, male, female, rich, poor, young, and old, they're still in place. So we brush ourselves off after the Easter hoopla. We take a few Sundays off for things to get back to normal. We regain our composure. We continue on our trek, our life journeys that end in death. So go ahead, set your goals, work hard, accumulate your stuff, build your walls to give you some modicum of security. But at the end, there awaits, grinning, ultimately victorious, death. And not only at the end, all along life's way, there are little deaths, lesser funerals. Some of our most painful dead ends come before the end. Sickness, for instance, has often been called a dress rehearsal for death, an intimation of that time when we will be cut off from the land of the living, isolated, alone, confined. After a long illness, when we at last get better, we are often shaken by that experience. There's a phone call late one night where the boss calls you in and tells you that you and your company have come to an end. Or you get that letter that tells you, congratulations, you're accepted. Oh no, it says we regret to inform you. A friend of mine is in his 80s. He's enjoyed good health most of his life. I was congratulating him on his spry disposition, and he replied, well, thanks. But I've seen enough to know that I'm just one false step, just one moment off balance, one wrong turn from complete disaster. And my days of independence and mobility are over. Teach us to number our days, says the psalmist, that we may go into the gate of wisdom. The person who knows that our days are limited, that our lives do not go on forever, that all of life's dead ends and setbacks and disappointments are dress rehearsals for the last breath, the last day, oh, that is wisdom. Teach us that our days are numbered so that we might wise up to the fragileness of life. This is the way we walk. This is the journey with death toward death. This journey toward death we call life. And yet we find ourselves walking with Jesus, the resurrected Christ. So, hey people, hold on to your hats because this can be, should be, will be a surprising trip. This Sunday we walk with Jesus into the town of Nain. Now by this time Jesus has attracted a crowd that moves with him as he moves. And because of Luke's gospel, we are able to be participants in Jesus' entourage. As Jesus enters town, there standing at the gate, we notice a dead man is being carried out. Now, last Sunday, it was Jesus ministering to the sick. Now things have gotten worse. Sickness experienced by most can often be a taste of death, a prelude for dying. Well, here it has become death. Death has taken over this whole town. Jesus' crowd arriving at Nain runs into death's crowd, coming out grieving out of Nain. And though Jesus has compassion for a sad, grieving mother, he orders her, "Don't weep," which certainly doesn't sound that compassionate. You don't tell grieving people, "Hey, don't cry." You don't order them around. Jesus commanding this poor grieving widow is surprising. But isn't that the way it is when we journey with Jesus? All along the way, he shocks, he surprises, he challenges our way of thinking, he disrupts our expectations, and he makes our lives more surprising than they would have been if we hadn't been walking with Jesus. Everything changes except death and taxes, so the slogan goes. And yet, after Easter, we don't walk alone. Jesus walks with us. He leads us down surprising paths that enables us to say everything changes except taxes. Into this believable, dusty little town, you've heard of Nain before. Jesus takes us there. Into these towns with their ordinary death and their usual grief. It's typically worried mothers and fathers. It's children without a future. That's where Jesus enters. And when Jesus comes to town, surprise, he commands even a grieving mother in his compassion for her. He commands her to take charge of her feelings and to defy even death, to be a victor rather than a victim. Even more surprising, Jesus even commands the dead, "Arise." And the dead do just that. Now, one might have thought Luke, ever the competent dramatist, would have saved a resurrection wonder like the raising of the widow's son for a more appropriate time later in the account of Jesus, at a more impressive location maybe, like up at the Holy City, perhaps sometime appropriately after Easter. No. Luke tells this surprising story here at the beginning, a while before Easter, in an out-of-the-way village nobody ever heard of, among anonymous ordinary people caught in the grip of ordinary everyday life and death. It's as if Luke says what the modern world teaches as extraordinary, miraculous, supernatural, that's just another day on the road with Jesus. Because now, once Jesus intrudes among us, God can surprise us anytime God pleases, pushing into new, previously off-limits territory that death thinks he owns. I love the way Luke reports this miraculous resuscitation as if this is ordinary, to be expected, just a momentary diversion in the journey with Jesus. In the Catholic Church, for somebody to be named a saint, there's an investigation that the miracles must be attributed to the work of the candidate for sainthood. Note the passage this morning. There are no names given for the grieving widow of Nain or for her dead son. And I like to think that maybe that's Luke's way of saying, hey, we don't remember their names because, well, this sort of thing happens all the time on the road with Jesus. Maybe we're meant to hear this story as what one might expect to happen in an ordinary little town like ours, or on an ordinary Sunday in June, to ordinary anonymous people like most of us. Note the reaction of the citizens of Nain. A young man has been brought back to life. A widow has been given a gracious reprieve from her otherwise dead end. The folks at Nain received a miracle with a curious mix of fear and glorification. Glory is understandable in response to a mighty work of God like this one, a dramatic defeat of death. And yet, there's also fear. Because it is more than a little frightening to experience firsthand the incursion of a living, surprising God who can kick through the barricades of death. Sometimes the surprising work of Jesus among us is glorious, and sometimes scary, and sometimes it's a bit of both. We don't know how to explain such scary, glorious moments when that which we thought was a dead end is not dead at all. Where a way is made when we thought there was no way. Some of the folks at Nain thought they'd found a great prophet among them. Others exclaimed, God has looked favorably on his people. And in a way, they are all correct. It was a glorious moment, and scary as well. Scary to come face to face with a living God who will not let death be the last word, who will not let death rule. Jesus is a great prophet who tells us and shows us the truth about our true situation with life and death. But above all, this little story is a parable of a great, grand Easter truth. In Jesus Christ, in his walking with us, even into the jaws of death, in his defeat of death, God has indeed looked favorably on God's people. Oh, yes, he is risen. The Lord is risen indeed.